time in Welland has come to a close. I didn't really want to leave, but I also wanted to see Max, and time was running out to make that work. So I left around 11:30ish, only to realize about 20 minutes into my drive that I'd left my phone charger behind. So I had to turn back around and convince myself to leave all over again. But eventually, I was on the road and on my way to Montreal. Once I was on the road, my main focus today was just on getting to Montreal to see Max. And it was more or less a straight shot there. I made 2 stops today, the first being at a Tim's/Wendy's in Bowmanville. I was somewhat craving McDonald's, but honestly, Wendy's has been upping their game recently and is usually actually better. Plus, I got to eavesdrop on a Wendy's manager telling 2 employees not to give out so much free food. So that made for kind of interesting entertainment for my meal. The second stop was a truck stop in Brockville, where a guy came up to me and told me how he hauls gas for a living, and 89 is just a 50-50 mix of 87 and 91, so it can sometimes be cheaper to just make the mix yourself, which, thanks man, but honestly with how abysmal I am at mental math, and how little of a difference it would probably make, especially considering the small tank and excellent fuel economy of the Insight, I don't think I'm going to be putting that advice into action, but thanks for looking out for me, I suppose. Quebec is definitely the province that has the most obvious shift once you've crossed the border. Leading up to Quebec, there were both French and English signs, but immediately upon crossing into the land of the French, the English signs vanish completely. The signage in general just has a bit of a different feeling to it, too. I don't really know how to explain it, beyond that the design language just feels very French. And on the highway, there is no longer just one single speed limit. There are now 2 signs, one on top of the other, a maximum speed and a minimum speed. But neither the maximum nor minimum speed had any unit of measurement listed, which, considering how close we are to the American border, seems like a slightly bad idea. I guess if you get pulled over, you could always just say that you thought the speed limit was in miles per hour and not kilometers per hour like it is everywhere else in the country. But hey, things are weird in Quebec, so who knows? In general, things just felt much more French-European in Quebec. Not just the signs, but the orientation of the traffic lights were different, and all the green lights were arrows, even if you were just continuing forward. Even the power lines had a slightly different and more European design to them than the ones in Ontario. I do have to say though, driving a low car with an aggressively rigged windshield, having the traffic lights mounted horizontally makes it nearly impossible to see any of them. When they're mounted vertically, like normal traffic lights, I can at least see the bottom light without needing to crane my neck. But anyway, I got into Montreal around 7:30, found a spot to park my car, and then Max and I walked around the city for a little while before getting some pizza. Because clearly I haven't had enough pizza yet on this trip. Oh, wait, I guess I actually never got into that, did I? When I first arrived in Welland, it was a Thursday, so of course, we got some pizza. Then when we went to Canada's Wonderland, we had pizza. And then at Cass's friend's party, they ordered in pizza. So, for my first 24 hours in Welland, I was sustained off of pure pizza. As one should be, honestly. In total today, I drove 706 kilometers, so a pretty short day by the standards set thus far by this trip. I averaged 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which I know I could have gotten down had I been less focused on just getting to Montreal, but hey, 3.6 is still far from inefficient. For the total trip, I'm also sitting at 3.6. There really wasn't anything specific I wanted to do in Montreal, as there had been in Welland, beyond just spending time with Max. So we decided to spend our day driving out to some of the smaller townships in the Montreal area. We went for a fairly long walk/hike in a place whose name I can't remember before heading out to Magog, the land of Big Lou. This is a cat Twitter reference that I'm sure no one will get. In Magog, I had possibly the best Subway sandwich I've ever had. The guy preparing it was a true sandwich artist. He put extra cheese on, carefully selected only the finest tomatoes, and asked if I wanted more of each topping. He should be given at least a 50-cent raise, maybe even 75 cents, honestly. In the evening, we went and hung out with Jay and Isaac of Walker and Wild, and Nelson, who's not in the band. And all three of them were super nice. We played Smash Bros. And Mario Kart, and it was just all around a great time. Even though I knew I wanted to leave stupidly early the next morning, I didn't want to go. I could have stayed there all night. I wish I could just go and hang out, talk about music, play games, and just joke around with such a great group of guys on a regular basis. Max sure is lucky to have found such a great group, and if they weren't on the opposite side of the country, I'd love to come and join in from time to time too. I got maybe an hour and a half of sleep on Max's floor last night before hitting the road just before 2 a.m. this morning. Honestly, I was feeling much more tired after waking up than before I'd gone to sleep. Maybe I should have just not slept. Oh well, it's too late to change that now. I was kind of surprised by the number of cars on the road in Montreal at 2 a.m. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but it was more than I'd expected that hour. As I was leaving the city, two vehicles just ripped right by me, and as soon as they passed, the one in the rear put on their lights, revealing themselves to be a cop. Kinda clever that they waited until passing me and the few other cars on the road before lighting up. Gotta keep that slow-moving traffic safe, I guess. I'm pretty sure that later on in the day, that same truck sped past me again, so getting pulled over did not change their driving habits. If anything, now they had to speed more to make up for the time lost by getting pulled over. So far, the weather has been nothing but perfect for my entire trip, but this is Canada, so of course that wasn't going to remain the case. And sure enough, this morning, it was raining. You know, Quebec might have worse roads than Manitoba, because holy, this is insane. Like, all morning it's just been like, I almost feel like I'm driving on a flat tire. And man, I was tired. Being in the rain and before too long the snow wasn't helping either. I had to pull over a couple times and take little cat naps across the front seats of the Insight just to keep myself from dozing off behind the wheel. I had a feeling that getting some food in me might help wake me up, but I was driving through small cities in Quebec, so everyone only spoke French. And while it's true that I may have gone to French immersion since kindergarten and I am legally bilingual, mon français n'est pas très bien. Eventually, I realized I wasn't going to be leaving the province soon enough, and I needed to get something in me. So I stopped at a gas station in Val d'Or and just did my best to say as little as possible while paying for my food. One interesting thing about the route I was taking today is that there were roundabouts on the highway. I mean, I guess it's not a major highway and roundabouts do keep traffic flowing better than traffic lights, but still, it was just kind of an interesting thing to see. But before too long, I was out of Quebec and back in Ontario, and out of the snow and back under blue skies. The reason I'd left so early this morning is because I was determined to cut Ontario down into just one stop. I was gonna make it to Thunder Bay tonight whether it killed me or not. And now that I was back in a province where I felt confident I'd be understood when I spoke, I decided it was time for lunch. So I stopped at an A&W in Cochrane. Only this A&W did not deliver the utopian fast food experience that I'd come to expect from dear old Allen and Wright. I mean, the food was honestly really good, but the dishwasher was broken, so they didn't have chilled mugs. So, because I was drinking out of a paper cup, I decided to get a Coke. Only that Coke tasted suspiciously like root beer. So I guess you're only allowed to get root beer at A&W. Even if you want something else, you're still getting root beer. Well, that's 1,000 kilometers today, and it is only 3:09. We've still got plenty to go. At this point, the life had come back inside of me, and I was no longer fighting against the immense weight of my eyelids. I was driving and feeling fine. The rest of the day was fairly uneventful, just a bunch of driving without any hiccups or real excitement to report. My final stop of the day was in Long Lac, where I was so caught off guard by the gas station being full service that I completely forgot about my bladder being ready to burst. So I had to make a second final stop a few kilometers later in a gravel parking lot with some bushes ripe for hiding in and peeing on. The sun was setting as I approached Thunder Bay, and I was feeling a slight bit worried about finding a place to sleep, seeing as it was nearly 10 p.m. And that worry was not misplaced, as the first two places I tried to get a room at turned me away. I was just like Mary and Joseph. Soon I'd be sleeping in a barn with a baby in a manger. Actually, I wound up staying at the Super 8, which was the most expensive hotel I've had to stay at yet. Hotels in Thunder Bay are a hot commodity, you would seem. They're high in demand and high in price. And according to the story the clerk at the Super 8 told me, also full of people getting high, so just high all round. But thanks to my BCAA membership, which I'd only just signed up to for this trip, it really wasn't that much more than the driving room, and it was significantly nicer. I realized I probably should have filmed the hotel rooms so I could have reviewed and compared them, because clearly this video isn't long enough already, but I forgot to film this one too, so whoops. But man, it had a cool 80s theme, and the bathroom had the same style faucet as I have at home, and I know how hard it is to keep those clean, so I was impressed. The Super 8 in Thunder Bay is worth the stay, although I left too early in the morning to get any free breakfast, so 2 points off for that. But anyway, I drove just over 1,600 kilometers today, and averaged 3.7 liters per 100 kilometers, which was mostly due to the drive out of Montreal being really inefficient. Ontario seems to be the province that this car is happiest in, so we'll just have to see how tomorrow compares. I left Thunder Bay around 5 a.m. without a free hotel breakfast. You'd think I would have learned from yesterday, but once again I made the mistake of not grabbing anything to eat at the start of the drive and then finding myself in the middle of nowhere with little to no options. Thankfully, I still had the muffin that Victor had given me before I left Welland, so I had that for breakfast, along with the remaining sweethearts that I picked up yesterday for energy. Google Maps really annoys me a lot of the time. Earlier today it was like, we found a faster route that saves you 2 minutes. And I'm like, okay, whatever, I didn't do anything. And now it has me going through the States. I don't want to have to go through the border to drive in the States for like 5 minutes. So now I'm going to have to drive up another road that's probably going to take way longer. And stupid fucking Google Maps, I swear to God. And even after I told Google Maps that I wanted to take the slower route and stay in Canada, it kept pinging at me every few minutes asking me to pull a U-turn and go back down the road I'd started driving on and cross the border. At first this would save me 30 minutes, then 15, 10, 5, and at that point, why are you even suggesting this alternate route to me? Is it not extremely obvious by the fact I've said no every other time you've asked and that I've continued to drive on the road I'm driving on, that I'm not interested in turning back and retracing my steps just to save maybe a half hour of my time? Beyond the frustration this caused me by interrupting my music, the way that Google Maps requires you to grab your phone and deny alternate route rerouting is honestly kind of dangerous. Maybe the programmers at Google assume you're traveling with a passenger or in a car with Google Maps built into the infotainment system. But I'm alone and being forced to take one hand off the wheel to unflip my phone and hit no on a route that I've already denied multiple times. That's dangerous, and actually illegal in Canada. So if you're a cop watching this, I pulled over every time I had to do this. That is 100% true and not a lie, I promise. But alas, that muffin and those sweethearts were not enough sustenance for the day. So once I'd made it past Kenora and Google Maps had accepted that I wouldn't be crossing into the land of the free today, I made a stop at a really big gas station in between Kenora and Winnipeg. It was massive, practically a small grocery store. It even had a little cafe in it with proper sandwiches and stuff, which is how I got a chicken bacon ranch sub. Which, and maybe this just had to do with how little food I'd eaten all day, was really, really good. Had it been warmed up, it would have just been a legitimately tasty sandwich, I think. My next stop of the day was in Winnipeg. I hate Winnipeg. Where I stopped in at a gas station to fill up and grab a Coke for energy. It was insanely windy and my hair was blowing all over the place and I was almost struggling to just stay upright. Just as I had gotten back into my car, someone pulled in next to me stupidly tightly. Had I not already been in my car, I don't know if I would have been able to get in without having to crawl in through the passenger seat or hatch. Thankfully, I was already in my car, but it was honestly kind of tricky backing out and avoiding hitting their car with how close they pulled in next to me. This drive through Manitoba has been significantly better. The roads are a little better on this side of the road. I think it's still very rough, but there's not like 2-inch gaps in the pavement every 5 feet. There was for a little while, but not as much as there was on the other side going through. Super duper windy and still very hot in my car. So that part's still not fun, the temperature in here. But otherwise, you know, it's going better. The sky is a lot clearer. It's not as hot. It's just very windy, and the roads are still rougher than most of the other provinces. As I made my way out of Manitoba and into Saskatchewan, the sky started to fill with dark, ominous clouds, and it looked like I may be getting a front row seat to a true prairie lightning storm. But while some rain did fall, no lightning struck and no thunder rolled. At one point, a semi-truck passed me, and as we were side by side, I felt my car almost glue itself to the side of the truck, like I was sucked into its airstream and just getting pulled along. It felt really cool and was great for fuel economy, but unfortunately, I was never able to replicate it. Must have been something special about that one truck, I guess. It was just past 7 when I made my way into Regina, where I'd be stopping in for dinner with an aunt and cousin of mine. I hadn't been to her house since elementary school, but as soon as I approached the neighborhood, it looked instantly familiar to me. We had chicken, rice, salad, and a fruit crisp for dessert, so quite a bit of food. But she made sure not to keep me long, as I was still wanting to make my way to Gull Lake, and that's still about 3 hours out from Regina. So I got back on the road around 8:30 and made my way to Gull Lake. My fuel economy was all over the place today. It started off really poorly, with the average reading being 5.1 liters per 100 kilometers for a while after leaving Thunder Bay. But soon I had it down to 4, and then 3.9 and 3.8 and so on. And by the time I'd made it into Manitoba, I had the average down to 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers. Things were really efficient at the start of the 7th most populated province, and I even managed to get the average down to 3.3. But then the speed limit changed to 110, and then Saskatchewan came along and just ruined everything I'd worked so hard for. It's weird how in the prairies, the car seems almost determined to not use the electric assist. It wants to just charge up the battery and then not use it, I guess. That and the whole province seems to be on a slight incline, so yeah, the average got all the way up to 3.7 for a while. Although I did manage to get it back down to 3.6 by the time I'd made it to Gull Lake, which was after driving 1,676 kilometers. So this was my longest day of driving, even though it didn't feel quite as extreme as yesterday. I was debating leaving stupidly early again this morning and trying to be home tonight. But I didn't want to drive on just an hour of sleep again, so I decided to save the stupidly early morning for tomorrow. Because of this, I actually had a bit of a later start today, and I wasn't on the road until just after 5 a.m. Seeing as I'd taken Highway 1 on the way out, I figured I'd see what Highway 3 had to offer me on the way back. So I started the day off by driving out to Medicine Hat to top up with gas, and was greeted by a sky full of hot air balloons. It was a really cool sight to see, and a stunning way to start the day.
Seriously, Google Maps is not my friend in this trip. It just did a little beep, didn't tell me, every now and then it'll just give you the indication beep, but it won't tell you why. And in this case, it's because it decided...
Take the next right onto Boundary Road Southeast.
In this case, it's because it decided that it was going to change the route I was taking when I was wanting to take Highway 3 because, well, there's closures on Highway 1.
In 600 meters, turn left onto Trans-Canada Highway, Alberta 1 East.
But like, what? I think it's trying to put me on Highway 1 again. I need to check this out. Sorry, this is... Yes, I drove past the sign for Highway 3 and I'm like, okay, maybe we're just staying on Highway 1 for a little while. But nope, it had just rerouted me to take Highway 1 when I had selected Highway 3, and it did not give me any indication of that being what it was going to do. It's really frustrating, this stupid thing. I don't even know why I'm using it in this case, because I know I'm just following signs for Highway 3, so I should just follow the signs for Highway 3. Why do I trust the stupid fucking Google Maps more than my own brain?
Maybe Google Maps was just trying to help me avoid the bit of construction that started my Highway 3 stint, since that was honestly quite backed up. But regardless, it was still being a little naughty and definitely not my friend. My first real stop of the day, because Medicine Hat doesn't count, was in Fort Macleod, where I grabbed a McDonald's Coke and had the tuna sandwich my uncle had prepared for me the night before. Once I'd finished my Coke and my sandwich, I moved my car over to a more level part of the parking lot to check my oil level and tire pressure. After checking the oil, a guy in a Hyundai Ioniq 5 drove up to me and began enthusiastically telling me all sorts of stuff about my car, his car, and the poor state of EV charge stations across Canada. He spent a lot of time on the speed camera monitoring system in his car and how there's speed cameras everywhere, and they're even disguising them as other stuff, but his car can pick them all up. At one point he brought up the Ioniq 6, but he called it the Iconic 6 instead, which I thought was kind of funny, especially seeing as he was wearing an Ioniq 5 hat. So you'd think he'd be more familiar with the name than that. Which, speaking of names, he did give me his, but it was immediately lost within the crevices of my brain folds. He had a lot to say and kind of kept me a little longer than I'd wanted, but hey, it's all good. It's not like I was still trying to catch the ferry tonight. I really wasn't in any major rush. And just as I was leaving Fort Macleod, the
check engine light came on for the third time. It's been quite a while. This is the first time since like the third day of traveling, I think. Happened while I was accelerating again after the car had been sitting for a while, and had the fans going. Let's see, come on. I'm assuming it's just the O2 sensor again, but come on, read it a little bit quicker, please. Come on, any minute now. Still got a little bit of a sinking feeling when it came on, but yep. All right, let's clear that. Unplug that. Put that back in the glove box. All right, let's get back on the road.
But wow, the scenery along Highway 3 was stunning. After Fort Macleod, things quickly began to look more and more like BC, with mountains cropping up in the background. But the abundance of windmills and farmland was a firm reminder that I wasn't quite yet back in BC. though I really wasn't far off. Much like how the old island highway takes longer than the inland highway, but feels shorter to me thanks to more varied scenery, Highway 3 may take longer than Highway 1, but with how frequently I was going in and out of little cities and towns, and how quickly the scenery started to look like home, it felt like I was making much better time than I probably actually was. Because before I knew it, I was back in BC, basically home. And soon I was in Fernie, which was really cool to see in its summer clothes. My mom's family used to meet there every other year for Christmas. It was a way for everyone to get together after my mom skipped town and moved to the island. It was chosen as a halfway point between the rest of the family in Saskatchewan and Alberta and us. But even though Fernie is in BC, we always had the longest drive. I figured the odds of me having the insight back out in Fernie again were pretty slim, especially seeing as if I were to head out there again, which I do want to do, I'd want to go in the winter, since I love their ski hill. There's this back mountain run that takes over an hour to complete with multiple lifts and a T-bar that I find to just be such a fun little adventure. But I wouldn't want to drive the inside out there in the snow. So I figured I'd head up the hill and pay the Grizz Inn, the hotel my mom's family has always stayed at, except for 1 year, which they really should have bought rooms in back in '96, but I guess that ship has long since sailed, a visit. It was kind of surreal to see the base of the ski hill covered in grass and yellow flowers. You don't really think about it when you only see somewhere covered in snow, but underneath that snow there is ground and grass in the summer, apparently.
I just listened to Juno by Remy Wolf, which was recommended to me by Cass. We did listen to it while I was in Ontario as well, but I gave it a full proper solo listening here, and you can probably guess what I'm gonna say. I really enjoyed it. It's really funky, and by that I don't mean like, oh, this is funky music. Like, I mean like the genre funk is what it made me think of. I really liked the lyrics are very stream of consciousness is how I would describe it. Like, it just kind of flows together and jumps all over the place, which is really cool. It said that there's not any meaning to them, but I don't know if I'm convinced of that. I was figuring out narratives as I was listening along. Yeah, I'm probably gonna check out more of her stuff, honestly. I really enjoyed it.
From there, I didn't stop again until Creston, where I went into a DQ that, according to a sign on the door, was only for service dogs. But I didn't see a single service dog in there. Just a bunch of filthy people. Disgusting!
So I listened to
Scenery
by Ryo Fukui. I think Max recommended this to me. Maybe it was Bobby. I don't fully remember. It was all just instrumental, so I don't really know what to say. Like, musically it was solid. It sounded good. I could tell that it was a skilled musician
In 400
playing music.
meters, turn left onto British Columbia 3 West.
I don't know, in 400 meters I'm turning left onto British Columbia, 403 West, so yeah. I don't know, I'll probably not listen to it again because I'm not big into listening to, oh, that was too early. I need to fix this.
3 West for 90 kilometers.
Yeah, I'm not really big into listening to music without lyrics, so, but it was enjoyable for a drive, but because there weren't any lyrics, I was just really thinking about how I needed to pee and how I needed to eat. So, I just did that, and now I'm back on the road again.
Soon, I was beginning to grow a little concerned as the Insight was almost seeming to lose power, and the battery level was dropping rapidly. The road didn't feel that steep, but I guess I should invest in an inclinometer, if that's how you pronounce that, because it turns out I was beginning the climb to Bridal Lake, which rests at an altitude of 5,820 kilometers. I mean, hell, the lake was still partly frozen over. The battery charge was depleted pretty fast, so I spent a good chunk of the climb just crawling along at a snail's pace in second gear. Thankfully, all that hard work was rewarded with a decline where I could just let the car coast, and where regen was able to bring the battery back up to a full charge fairly quickly. But this was only the first of many mountainous climbs along the Crow's Nest Pass. Thankfully, none nearly as intense as that initial Bridal Lake climb. The uphills were a bit of a struggle, but the downhills were a lot of fun. It was almost like downhill skiing in a way, and since I could rely on regen to keep me at a reasonable pace, at least until the battery was fully charged, I didn't have to worry about gas or brakes, just coasting and steering. It was a good time.
One thing I forgot to say about the Remy Wolf album was that it sounded like morning music to me, by which I mean like Hello City, which is what I'm listening to now, or ELO. Something that gets you pumped up and ready to take on the day. It just has like a happy kind of goofy, good energy to it. Yeah.
I hadn't topped up with gas since Medicine Hat this morning, and as I was making the descent into Osoyoos, I only had 2 bars of fuel left. But once in Osoyoos, I had to stop at a red light. And I guess the battery isn't the only thing capable of recharging itself, because suddenly I had 3 bars of fuel again. So I figured why not see if I could make this magically reappearing 3rd bar last all the way until Penticton. Things were looking pretty good for that 3rd bar of fuel. I passed a sign indicating 63 kilometers to go and it was still there. Then 55 kilometers to go and it was still there. Then I entered Oliver and it was still there. But with less than 10 kilometers to go, that 3rd bar of fuel decided it had stuck around long enough. And I entered Penticton with only 2 bars of fuel. In total today, I drove 1,179 kilometers, which, isn't too shabby for 1 tank of gas. And seeing as each of those bars in the fuel gauge typically more or less equate to 100 kilometers, I still had another 100 to 200 kilometers I could have gone. I averaged 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers along this stint, which again is really solid when you consider just how much hill climbing I had to do today. Sure, each of those climbs was followed up with some nice coasting, but that doesn't fully zero out the effects of climbing up multiple mountains. The total trip average is still 3.6, surprising absolutely no one. And this was it. I would be home before sundown tonight. I was back in BC and just wanting to get home to see Broccoli. The longest I'd been away from him in the past was 1 week, and he was absolutely glued to my side when I got back from that. I did try to explain to him what would be happening, but I have a feeling he might not have fully understood what I'd said. Cats, am I right? Anyway, I had set my alarm for 11:40 p.m. and was on the road just after midnight, with the goal of making it to the ferry terminal in Vancouver in time for the 6:25 a.m. sail. The Insight did not seem very happy with me as we were making our way out of Penticton. I'm not sure if the first few climbs are significantly steeper or something, but it was struggling to hold speed on ground that really did not seem that far off from flat to me. Although that's the same thing I thought while climbing up to Bridal Lake, so what do I know? There was one point where I really felt like I was accelerating, only the speedometer was moving backwards for whatever reason. Thankfully, it wasn't too long before things started to feel normal again, so I suspect the roads were just a tad steeper than my eyes perceived them to be. Unsurprisingly, the roads were virtually empty. Even as I approached and drove through Vancouver, it was rare to see much traffic beyond the odd semi-truck. And I made it to the ferry terminal with time to spare, right around 4:30, actually 6 minutes ahead of Google Maps' predicted arrival time, which is rare for me, especially if I'm driving the Insight. And the ferry terminal wasn't even open yet. Turns out they don't start selling tickets until 5:25. So I stretched my legs out, pulled out my Switch, and ran laps around Baby Park as I waited. But before too long, a bunch of people wearing BC Ferries uniforms began to populate the area, and soon I'd purchased a ticket and was making my way down towards the big boat. We boarded slightly ahead of schedule and set sail across the sea. On the way out on the ferry, I got a bacon and egg breakfast sandwich, and it was one of the saddest breakfast sandwiches I've ever had the displeasure of consuming. The egg was thinner than a nickel, the English muffin dry, and the bacon was barely discernible. I was weary to get another, but the eggs Benny was too expensive, and frankly I wasn't convinced that it would be any better. So I rolled my dice and got another breakfast sandwich, though with ham instead of bacon this time. And it was significantly better. I mean, I still wouldn't write home about it, but I would apparently include it in a script for a needlessly long video about a road trip that no one's gonna watch. So that's gotta mean something. Beyond the better breakfast sandwich, this ferry ride just felt a little off. I kept hearing crashing noises and the boat didn't seem to be sailing perfectly level or straight. But we didn't sink, so I guess everything was hunky-dory. The difference in daylight between boarding and departure was kind of insane, and it felt much later in the day to me than just after 8 a.m., though I guess that's what happens when you get up just before midnight after only sleeping for a couple of hours. It felt almost surreal to be back on such familiar streets after so long driving in all sorts of new and unfamiliar places. I made my way through Nanaimo and soon I was cruising along the Old Island Highway. That's a drive I always enjoy, especially in the Insight, and today it felt like a nice warm hug welcoming me back home. The one thing that wasn't nice to come back home to were the gas prices. When I left, it was $1.78 and slowly dropping, and now it's $1.89 and rising.
Okay, I just listened to AJJ's new album, Disposable Everything, which came out either today or yesterday. This was recommended to me by no one, other than AJJ themselves and I guess myself. And this is actually the third time I listened to it today. The first time was in the morning, and then second time, well, it's still the morning. It's only 9:47 right now, but you know what I mean. I have a feeling this album's gonna grow on me. The first listen, I was just gonna like, I don't think it's their strongest album by any means. It's definitely stronger than Good Luck Everybody. Although I think there were a couple songs on Good Luck Everybody that were stronger on their own, like the Body Terror song and No Justice, No Peace, No Hope. But yeah, we'll have to see. I think I need to dig into the lyrics a little bit more because I couldn't quite figure everything out just by listening alone in a car with wind and road noise. But definitely enjoyed it. I think it could be like the Bible too and Christmas Island, where at first I was like, I don't know, these aren't their best, and now I really enjoy them. They're all on the same level as like Can't Maintain. So yeah, just a little AJJ talk for you.
Well, I drove 568 kilometers today and averaged 3.5 liters per 100 kilometer. I had a hard morning with the average getting all the way up to 4.1, but once I'd made my way through the worst of the Okanagan Hills, I was able to drop that down fairly quickly and had it back to 3.6 by the ferry terminal. The drive home from there is familiar and, when all the stars align just right, can be hyper efficient. And today, for the most part, it was. I was able to get the average down to 3.4. But on one final hill climb up to my house, it jumped back to 3.5. Ah well. As I'm sure you can no doubt guess, the total average for the trip is still 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers. So on the way back, I drove 5,734 kilometers. Since I didn't keep track of how much gas I used, and I only have the total trip average, my calculations for fuel usage may be slightly off, but it really shouldn't be by that much. Taking the total trip fuel economy and distance traveled, I used roughly 206 liters of gas. I spent $358.49 on gas on the way back, which means I paid on average $1.74 per liter. So for the full trip, I drove around 10,600 kilometers, but I don't think that's including the little bit of extra driving I did while I was in Welland and Montreal. And I spent $669.47 on gas in total.
Well, it's been a while now since I made this trip, and I'm still so incredibly glad that I did. It was an absolutely unforgettable experience, and one that, had I not done it when I did, likely wouldn't have wound up happening for another 3 or 4 years. On top of that, this project of turning the trip into a video, something I thought might take a month or 2, but has now almost taken 8, allowed these memories to stay with me a lot longer than they would have normally. And while that does run the risk of me becoming the guy who won't shut up about the one time they did that big trip, why shouldn't I stay with the excitement? If something makes you happy, be happy about it, goddammit! I'm not sure I'll ever financially recover from this, although granted at this point there are several other factors at play in my poor financial situation. But if I ever do have enough stability to do something like this again, I'd absolutely love to. It doesn't need to be another full cross-country jaunt, but something that involves leaving the island and has at least a solid day or 2 of driving would be nice to do. I really enjoyed waking up each day and knowing the only thing I had to do was make it somewhere else. There was no pressure to be productive or sense of guilt at sundown. It was freeing and just really, really fun. And I'm so glad that I got to do this trip in my Insight, because this really is what that car was designed to do. Just drive large distances with little to no stopping throughout the day. And I really hope this is only the first of many road trips that I get to do in this car. Of course, getting to spend time with Cass, Max, my cousin Corey, and a few other family members too was really nice, and it felt so easy to just go back out and visit them again while I was there. I wish it was. And the new people I met too were all just fantastically nice. All in all, this was just a fantastic experience. And if it seems like something you think you'd enjoy, I highly recommend taking the plunge and making it happen. I'm sure glad that I did. Sure, you might be in financial ruin for a few years to come, but hey, you were gonna be anyways. That's modern capitalism for you. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future. Whew.